After yet another devastating Game 7 loss, it seems the hockey gods may finally have mercy on Leafs fans' souls, and this core will finally be changing this summer. I say that as if we haven't been saying that for the last 3 seasons at this point, but just with how devastating this was and how much of a ghosting, once again, a lot of that core 4 was, it seems major changes almost need to happen or else Leafs fans might riot, and rightfully so. So today I'm going to be breaking down some of my ideas for what the Leafs could do this summer, as well as going through some of your mock trades for Toronto to see what could happen next and what could potentially happen. But make sure you guys watch till the end as we go through all the mock drafts and all the trade ideas here today. And if that's subscribing if you're new for more hockey content just like this, we cover everything surrounding the draft, free agency, and of course the end of the NHL playoffs. Now let's start with the changes I would make to this Toronto team if I was in charge of them, and the first thing for me that I would instantly change if I had the chance for them is to find a premier puck mover on the defensive side. And this is kind of an issue I've had with this Leafs team for a while, and mostly comes down to my pessimism regarding Morgan Rielly. For me, I think a big problem with this Leafs team is that they've overcorrected from some of the early years in that Leafs core. The defense was a bit of a problem, closing out games. The experience also was a massive question mark, and of course you go after guys like Chris Tanev, Carlo, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, the defensive side on players like Benoit and McCabe as well, really being their bread and butter. This defense is made to shut down the game when the going gets tough. Now, they didn't quite do that, and I think the problem is they don't have that extra wave of offensive defensemen that can carry the puck out of the zone effectively, can actually create offense, because as we've learned in a lot of cases, having the puck is really the best defense. It really creates so much more advantages for you, but this Leafs team just doesn't have the puck movers on the back end to be able to compete that way. And thus it puts so much more stress on the forward group to rush up the ice, to do everything offensively, when really the only offensive defenseman you have is Morgan Rielly, and even then, the production and the results are limited. In Rielly's case, I think since signing that $7.5 million multi-year extension, the results have been a bit inconsistent for him. I mean, he got 58 points last year, pretty successful season, 51 assists there, but this season down to 41 points in 82 games, and he had his moments in the playoffs, 4 goals in 13 games, but again, he's the only guy there that really has much offensive potential, and even then, he's not this premier puck mover that I think he used to be. In fact, I think Rielly has gotten worse as the Leafs have gotten a much more defensive core because he just has nobody else to put the weight off of his shoulders. There's nobody else that can really run a power play. There's nobody really else that can rush up the ice like Morgan Rielly can do on occasion. But even then, I think Rielly in this pure offensive role is still a bit limited. And I think for this Leafs defense, at least having somebody else, at least one other defenseman that you could reliably get some power play minutes from, be able to rush up the ice in transition, actually help in the offensive zone, I think would be something that is important for them. I love me some Chris Tanev, so I'll never hate that acquisition. Jake McCabe has always been really good for this Leafs team, but instead of going and trading as much as they did for a player like Brandon Carlo, who had some pretty middling results, especially in this series versus Florida, what if they went after and actually got a top 4 puck-moving defenseman? What if it was a Jake Wallman, who the Edmonton Oilers got and has been unbelievable in this year's playoffs so far for the Oilers? That would have changed everything, I think, for this Leafs defense, and I think could have put them in a much better spot. I don't think it would have won them Game 7 necessarily, but I think it would have made them a more complete team. At least a team that had more offense from the back end, and again, I think that's something that the Leafs should be targeting, but in all honesty, with how Treliving has really built up this defense, I'm not sure how confident I am in the Leafs actually going in that direction. In fact, with how Treliving has built up this defense, I wouldn't be surprised if Morgan Rielly is the only defenseman traded, and it's for like Zach Bogosian or something. I don't know how that would work, but it would not surprise me. The second thing I want to prioritize for this Leafs team, especially this offseason, is speed and intensity, and this is something that I think the Leafs really need a lot more of after, especially the last few trade deadlines, going for a lot of heavy defensive players, and of course, there is place for those type of players, but I look at that top 6 especially and continue to just kind of come up a little bit disappointed. Now, I don't know what I would do specifically with Marner, because having him walk still with the value he has, I think would be a really brutal blow. But at the same time, there's almost no way you can keep him in this environment because, again, I think Leafs fans would genuinely riot, and I think they have a good case for it. But if there's some way where you can NHL 25 it, where you sign him for a year and trade him, I don't think that would ever happen, of course. But I think in the Leafs case, one of the big issues I come back to with this forward group is lack of speed, intensity in their forward group, especially on the wings. I think this is something that a team like Carolina especially has done well. You have a player that they drafted with pick the Leafs traded in Seth Jarvis, who, oh my goodness, would be perfect for this team right now. but unfortunately they had to trade it away. A big issue I have with this team is just the lack of dog, not just in the critical moments, but just the players they bring in. I mean, even though I like players like Scott Laughton and the defensive game is still steady with them, they're not guys that are going to be unbelievable on the puck and off it. They're not going to be unbelievable forecheckers, making life so chaotic for your team. Yet when you go to Florida, you got players like Evan Rodrigues, Verhaeghe, Larissa Linen, Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, Marchand, Reinhart. I mean, the list goes down for this Florida team and how much different they are built, and I think are much better structured than the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm still kind of shocked the Leafs were able to force 7 games against this Florida team, because on paper, it's completely different. Imagine if the Leafs had just one Larissa Linen or a Sam Bennett type of player, another type of piece like that onto that forward group. I mean, I think the structure is already there for those players to really succeed under Craig Berube and what he's been able to do there already. I think the fact that he got this team and how weak they are on that forward group to game 7 against Florida is honestly a pretty great testament to how good of a coaching style he's brought onto that team, but they just don't have the weapons. They don't have the assets and the forces on that forward group to compete with the big dogs and continually come up short. Of course, you want to see those big moments out of players like Matthews, Tavares, and Marner consistently game after game, but I think a big issue is that when they're not scoring, nobody else is really. And what we see continually in the playoffs is that depth wins, depth matters, and depth is maybe the most important thing you can have as a structured team. I mean, even a team like Edmonton has had unbelievable performances out of some of their top bottom end players, but that's just because the structure they have in the playoffs lends to those type of opportunities for them. But you look at this Leafs team and the problems that continually happen. I think the depth has been an issue, the top end has been an issue, but the core middle part of that team, guys that really put in a lot of the work when it's all said and done, are missing. They don't have those type of players, and I think that is a massive problem. But now let's move on to your mock trades for this Toronto Maple Leafs team this summer, the issues that could be fixed with some of these deals, because there's a lot of different ways this Leafs team could go, but let's dive right into it. Now, the first mock trade we have comes from 999 for Life with an LA Kings offer here, saying to LA, Austin Matthews, or Brandon Carlo or Jake McCabe, pretty interchangeable. Then to Toronto, Quinton Byfield, Brant Clark, a 2025 first, and a 2026 first or second. Goes on to say both teams that desperately need to make a huge trade to completely shake up their roster. Both teams need to get over that hump. The draft picks aren't as crucial to the deal, like it can be a 2026 second instead. It's more the players. I was also considering Matthews to Vegas, but looking at their roster, nothing really jumped out to me as potential fits for Toronto, and that does make sense. This, especially if Toronto wants to get, I guess, a little bit younger, this could certainly do that. I will say, personally for me, I don't know if I'm on the Austin Matthews trade train, just because it seems like he was pretty banged up this playoffs, and this is the lowest his value will ever be. Rightfully so, but again, I think you want to bet at least a little bit higher in Matthews' case. I still don't think even without the defenseman attached on this deal, it's enough for a player like Matthews when it's all said and done, even though his value is at the lowest, but it definitely is an interesting offer. Though I think this really all depends on how the Leafs view Quinton Byfield specifically, because Brant Clark, I think, checks a few boxes there as a younger defenseman that can move the puck already, has shown some great moments for LA, even in the playoffs. That to me is a player I think the Leafs should really be going for if they can. But Byfield, even though I love him a lot, I think could get scrutinized a lot in Toronto, especially because he's been up and down as a winger, as a center. You're not really knowing what position you're going to get in as long-term, and I don't know if you can completely bet on him replacing a player like Matthews, especially in the goal-scoring department. I love Byfield, but again, we're talking about speed especially. Byfield is not that type of player, though, again, Brant Clark is somebody I would try to go after if I could, maybe in a lower stakes type of deal, if possible. To me, I think this would be an auto, except if you're the LA Kings, getting Matthews, and especially for them, another defenseman back. For how much they hate Brant Clark, I mean, I could see it happening on their side, but I think, especially for the Leafs, you'll want to have a little bit more value there. Maybe another forward being brought back, especially for the Wings. Maybe a Trevor Moore reunion, perhaps? Who knows? Now, Jack Maloney puts out a very fascinating one between Vancouver and Toronto, saying Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser's rights, and Suter's rights for Austin Matthews, saying that Besser wants 8 years, so whoever trades for him will get him. And that is an interesting one. I do think you'd want to have at least a defenseman coming back or somebody else, but this would be fascinating, especially because of Elias Pettersson and how much the struggles have been well documented over the last year for him in Vancouver. I mean, getting a player like Austin Matthews would certainly change that team in a big way. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument, again, that Brock Besser signs, Pia Suter signs as well for Toronto. So it would be Elias Pettersson, Besser, and Suter for Austin Matthews. I'm not sure how I feel about that. That's actually interesting. Again, though, I think it kind of becomes a little bit of a problem because, especially in Toronto, I mean, poor Elias Pettersson, man, already having to deal with that Vancouver market. Then he goes on to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that boy better be producing because it would be trouble if he wasn't. My issue with this trade, as we talked about earlier, is again the speed element for the Leafs. I would really want them to go after dogs if they were to trade for Austin Matthews if possible. Besser isn't that. He's more of a goal scorer, more of a perimeter guy. Elias Pettersson obviously has shown that he hasn't been the unbelievable effort type of player that you want to see 100% of the time. Pius Suter is a solid player. I think he'd be a good center for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I think you would want more again in that type of deal. Vancouver doesn't have a ton of those guys, but maybe a Kiefer Sherwood instead. That would certainly be interesting. I love him a lot. Maybe that's able to work its way somehow. But again, speed, maybe Niels Hoglander as well a part of the deal. Something extra I think needs to happen here. Now, an interesting thought experiment from Captain Poppy and a 3-team trade here, saying that everyone is freaking out and trading the top players, but in reality, they're going to make moves to build around the current team. So to Toronto, Rickard Rakell, 25% retained, Nola Chari, Jason Dickinson. To Pittsburgh, Brandon Kressler, Kalle Yarncroc, Alex Steves, Pontus Holberg, 2026 third, 2026 second, 2028 second. To Chicago, Matt Benning, David Camp, Nick Robertson, a third, and a fifth. Saying the Leafs get better depth and still have lots of money for other moves, including re-signing players. Penguins get a good return for Rakell coming off a great year, including a prospect, one of the AHL's top scorers. Chicago adds a bit in areas of need like defense, faceoffs, scoring, and PK. Now, it's interesting because I do think Captain Poppy also part of this, potentially Marner ends up going away in free agency, but the rest of the core is retained, and I think that would be interesting, especially if you put in a player like Rickard Rakell, who does bring some speed at times, does bring some intensity, but also, again, has its inconsistent moments. So, an interesting one, especially a player like Jason Dickinson, who's been really underrated in his time with Chicago. I think that would be a pretty good add, especially. I think the problem here, though, is Pittsburgh, especially because they have been really hesitant to trade Rickard Rakell in the past. I think this last trade deadline, there was a first-round pick on offer for him, and the Penguins ended up declining that. So it would have to be pretty massive value for, I think, the Penguins to really consider it, especially in next year's draft. 2026, I think, is when the Penguins would really want to start prioritizing picks then. They would get a 2026 third, but I think they'd want a little bit more juice than that, at least a little bit more consistently. In Chicago's case, I mean, Nick Robertson I think could be fun, but again, I think it comes down to Pittsburgh especially because I think they'd want a little bit more than that. We got one from the Burbos talking about a potential Minnesota-Toronto trade, saying the Minnesota Wild will acquire Matthews. In exchange, this is going to be mouthful, Toronto acquires a 2025 second, 2026 first, 2027 first, 2028 second, 2029 third, Matt Boldy, and Jesper Wallstedt. Now, I will say, I think for the Leafs, Matt Boldy would be exceptional. That's the exact type of young player, Swiss Army knife, I think the Leafs should be really going after. But how likely are the Wild going to want to trade him in the end? Well, getting a like Austin Matthews would certainly move the needle a little bit, I think, for the Wild. And at this point, Jesper Wallstedt, I think, even though I still believe him as a goaltending prospect, I'm not sure how much of a future he has in Minnesota, especially with how much Philip Gustin has taken over that net. That's something that also could potentially get dealt. My main concern with this, though, is how that center situation looks going forward, though, especially with the amount of picks that they acquired here, they could pretty easily use at least a few of those picks to go out and get a centerman in the center in the market this summer, potentially. I'm not sure who that would be, but, man, Matt Boldy would especially be interesting. I would only like this, though, if they're going to acquire another center, if they're going to go after a player like Sam Bennett or something in free agency, because I think that really is what holds up this deal for me, because the Leafs cannot go into next year with, I mean, especially if they have Tavares go into free agency as well and have him off the roster. Scott Laughton as your first-line center? Come on. But if there is something more to this type of deal, then I think the value isn't crazy. I think this is pretty similar to what we would see if it's all said and done. It's a crazy amount for Austin Matthews, but at the same time, when he's at his best, he is still a transformative player. We'll see what ends up happening here, but Matt Boldy especially would be a pretty good Leaf, I would say, and those picks, especially back for Toronto, I mean, they need some more prospects in that pool for sure, and even using a few of those, I think, would be a pretty big success for them. And finally, we got one from Vix14 saying, probably should just move the franchise at this point, and you know what? It's not a mock trade, but I think Leafs fans would win this, honestly. But those are some of our ideas for what could happen next with this Leafs team. A lot is going to be happening this summer with the unrestricted free agents, not even the rest of the team. A lot of action will be happening, though, and we'll be covering it all here, right here on the channel, so you do not want to miss a thing. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell for more mock trade videos, more trade videos in general on the channel going forward. And, of course, click on this card for all of my hockey trade content right in one playlist. Of course, make sure you subscribe, comment down below your thoughts on all the mock trades here. And what is your mock trade for this Leafs team to shake up this roster this summer? Let me know your thoughts down below on that. And I will see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.